Welcome to part 3. Now it is time to discuss the planets. Now in astrology, the sun and moon are also considered planets. So, just to recap, since we did discuss the sun and moon in the last part, the sun is ego, core self, and general characteristics. And the moon is emotions, intuition, and inner self. So, now it's time to move on to Mercury. Mercury's symbol or glyph looks like this. Right here. And Mercury is intellect and communication. And next is Venus. Venus will look, its symbol will look like that right here. And Venus is beauty and romance. Next is Mars. Mars is action and courage. Now, before I go on, the planets we've covered up to this point are known as the personal planets, meaning they're really evident, they're really noticeable. So now we're going to go on to Jupiter and Saturn, which are a little more abstract, a little bit deeper meaning, a little bit deeper in understanding. So, Jupiter. Looks similar to a 4 right here. And Jupiter is abundance and good fortune. It's also expansive in nature. Next is Saturn. Saturn is about mastery and limitation. And unlike Jupiter, which is expansive in nature, Saturn is restrictive in nature. Now, the planets that we've covered up to this point are used in Western astrology and Vedic astrology. Now, the next 3 planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, are not used in Vedic astrology, but they are used in Western astrology. And these next 3 planets are very, very, you could use the term deep, very abstract, basically on a whole nother level compared to the planets we've covered so far. So next is Uranus. Uranus is about sudden changes and revolutionary ideas. Next is Neptune. Looks like a trident, its symbol does. Neptune is mystical and dreamy. And next is Pluto, which can have, I've seen two different symbols for it. One, it will look about like that, and the other will look like that. So we have this one or this one. It could be either or. These are, I've seen both. And Pluto is transformative and occultic. And before we move on, I also should mention that Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto cannot be seen without a telescope, while the planets up to Saturn can be seen without a telescope. They just show up as like a bright star in the sky. But Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, you have to have some type of magnification for Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Now, you probably won't see this very often at all, if at all, but if you ever do run across this symbol, that is the symbol for the Earth. And since we're on the Earth, you will probably not see it on a natal chart. But if you do see it, that's what it looks like. That, if you see that, that is the Earth. Now, something else that we need to look at is something called retrograde, or retrograde planets. Retrograde. And with retrograde planets, you'll see the planet's symbol, which I already have them drawn out here, which I'll go over in a moment. But you will have a little R or a big R with a little line through it next to the planet. And the retrograde symbol will look something like, it can be drawn like this, or it can just be a little R. And this will show up next to a planet symbol. Now, it could show up here on the chart, or it could show up, like here is where I have the planets drawn out. It could show up as a little R beside their glyph, or basically just look for the little R and the big R with the little line through it next to the planet, and that will mean it's retrograde. An example here is Saturn retrograde. Here is Mercury retrograde. Now, before we go any further, retrograde, imagine, okay, the sky is going to spin clockwise on the chart. This is your chart. Remember, this is the horizon. The sky is going to spin clockwise. Now, the planets are going to go this way through the signs. The planets are going to go this way. However, at times, the planets will go like this, then they'll stop, and they might go back a little bit, then they'll stop, and they'll go back the other way, the normal way. And that, whenever it stops and goes back this way, which is not the normal way, that means the planet is going retrograde. So it's going normal or straight, then it stops and goes retrograde, then it stops and goes back forward again. So what does retrograde do? In simple terms, it will make the planet's energy unstable. Could also, in some cases, it could cause indecisiveness. The next thing we need to cover is the north and south lunar nodes. Now, these are virtual points, or they're not actually a real object, but they're virtual points in the orbit of the moon. And they will look like, this will be the north node, kind of like a horseshoe shape, and this will be the south node. North node points up, south node is pointing down. And the south node is where we feel comfortable, but we must get our energy out of the south node. The north node is where we must direct our energy to, get it out of the south node and into the north node. And in simple terms, there's a few exceptions, but in simple terms, the north and south node are always retrograde. Always. Next, time for a little bit of math. Oh joy. Well, unless you like math. If you like math, it really is joy. So, next is degrees. This is a circle. The sky, if you go around the zodiac, it's a circle. And circles have 360 degrees. And what is 360 divided by 12? Because there's 12 signs. 360 divided by 12 is 30. So 30 degrees per sign. And if we go around through this circle, the way this is drawn out right now, you'll start right here, 0 all the way around to 360, or technically 259, then back to 0, technically. So in each sign, we'll go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, all the way to 29. Then we'll start with 0 and go all the way to 29. 30 degrees per sign. Now you could lay that out a little bit different, but I'm trying to keep things as simple as I can. You could describe it a little different. And ascendant, descendant, as I mentioned, as I've talked about before, they are exact opposites. Ascendant and descendant is always 180 degrees apart. So next, let's look at, we went over this in the last part, the sun in Taurus, and the degrees, you'll see little marks right here, which I kind of drew in there. A lot of times, you might have the sun, for example, the sun, and you might have a 8 beside it, and then some other little numbers or something. Well, this might be in a big list, and depending on how the chart's laid out, it could be laid out different ways. That will mean 8 degrees. The sun will be at 8 degrees in whatever sign. In this case, Taurus. And if we count this up, well, I put marks here, so like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. Keep it simple. 7. So, 7 degrees Taurus. Now, it can go up to, there's 30 degrees in Taurus. But in this case, it's 7 degrees Taurus. And there might be marks around the circle, there might not. But if it's not lit, if the numbers are not down here, there'll probably be somewhere on the chart, like on a list of planets. I mean, you could, let's say, put like a little 7 or something down there. But now, the moon, let's say it's 4 degrees Sagittarius. Or, if the marks aren't there, then you'll have something like, and it might have a 7. Now you also have some other little numbers out there, but in some cases, but normally, like probably the bigger number, it's right next to like the planet, for example. There might be some other little numbers out there, but this is what's important for degrees. We can also look at Mercury. In this case, Mercury, I made it bigger right here, but Mercury has a little R beside it. And the way I have this chart drawn, you can also count the degrees. Looks like probably 25 degrees Gemini. So you might have something like that, and 25, you might have a little R on there because it's retrograde, or you might have something around there like that. But now that we've got to Mercury, and I've showed you Mercury, now let's do a recap. Let's do a recap here. So, what is the sun? In the last part, we went over the sun. What is the sun? The sun is the ego, the core self, and the general characteristics. Now that being in Taurus is going to mean, now that being in Taurus is going to mean practical and realistic and resistant to change. That's how the ego, the core self, and general characteristics will come through. Now, the moon, emotions, intuition, and inner self, that's in Sagittarius. So, if we look at Sagittarius, then that is mutable fire. So, we have enthusiastic and spontaneous and adaptable and flexible. Now, if we look at the ascendant, we have Cancer. And before I forget, degrees works the same way. Whatever degree the ascendant's on, it might be up here with the planets. You might have an AC or an AESC, and it'll have the degrees beside it. Same as a planet, whatever degree it's at, the ascendant will be a degree in a certain sign as well. So, ascendant in Cancer. Now, the ascendant in Cancer will be outward image, the way others first perceive you, will come through in emotional and intuitive, and it will be initiative and enthusiastic. So now, let's move on to Mercury. Intellect and communication. Mercury, right here in Gemini, it actually rules, the planet Mercury actually rules in Gemini. So, Mercury, the intellect and communication given by Mercury will come through as mutable air, or the intellect and communication will come through as, well, communicative and intellectual like air, but adaptable and flexible. And it will be unstable because of the retrograde. Could also cause some indecisiveness with the intellect and communication. Next is Venus, beauty and romance. Now, Venus is in Scorpio. So having Venus in Scorpio, fixed water, will have emotional and intuitive and resistant to change. That will be the nature of how the beauty and romance will come through in the chart. Next is Mars. Mars, action and courage. In Leo, the action and courage will come through as enthusiastic and spontaneous, but resistant to change. Jupiter, abundance and good fortune, expansive in nature. It being in Capricorn, the abundance and good fortune will come through in a practical and realistic, yet initiative and enthusiastic way. Saturn, mastery and limitation. And is restrictive. So, Saturn, being right here, Libra, and retrograde. So, Saturn, mastery and limitation, will come through as communicative and intellectual and having initiative and enthusiasm. But it will be unstable and could be some indecisiveness. Next, Uranus. Sudden changes and revolutionary ideas. Having Uranus in Aquarius, fixed air, communicative and intellectual and resistant to change. That's how the sudden changes and revolutionary ideas will, that will be the nature that they will have. Neptune, mystical and dreamy. Right here. Mutable Earth, Virgo. So the mystical and dreaminess will come through on the chart as practical and real. The mystical and dreaminess will be in a practical and realistic way. Sounds kind of odd, but that's how that'll come through, and it will be adaptable and flexible. Pluto, transformative and occultic. And Pluto can be a very hard one to describe, by the way, just in general. But anyway, Pluto in Pisces, mutable water, so transformative and occultic, that energy from that planet manifesting as in a emotional and intuitive way and being adaptable and flexible. North Node in Cancer, South Node in Capricorn. The nodes are directly 180 degrees apart, 180 degrees apart. There could be a few little exceptions, but in basic terms, they are always retrograde. So, the North Node and South Node. The South Node in Capricorn, meaning the comfort zone of the practical and realistic earth nature and initiative, enthusiastic nature as well. That will be to get your energy out of that, into the North Node, into the emotional, the water, the emotional, intuitive, yet initiative and enthusiastic type of energy. Get out of the earth into the water, in simple terms, in basic terms. So that should be it for part 3. Next is part 4.